I never thought peace would come with a price like this. Real peace. The kind that sinks into your bones and makes you breathe a little easier after 22 years in the Army, with all those deployments, the dust, the bunkers lit up by buzzing fluorescent lights. I thought I'd seen the worst of what people could do to each other. But let me tell you nothing. I'd faced out there halfway across the world prepared me for the kind of war waged right here at home with smiling faces and HOA letterheads. I didn't know back then, standing in the driveway of my new house, keys in my hand, Daniel waiting in the truck, sun dipping behind the tree line that Meadowbrook Ridge with its neat lawns and picture-perfect sidewalks was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. All I wanted after everything was quiet, just some corner of the world where I could raise my son without the weight of the clock or the constant ache of missing something important. Daniel, well, he'd already lost enough. His mother, Anna, she was gone before he turned 5. Pancreatic cancer, one of those words you hear once and never forget. 4 months between diagnosis and the funeral. I swear there are days I still wonder if I imagined it, if the grief was just a shadow I carried around, hollowing me out so I could fill the emptiness with service deployment distraction. You know what I mean? For years, that's what I did. Missed birthdays, sent cards from bunkers, built up my own walls instead of a home. But when Daniel hit 10, everything changed. The boy needed more than postcards from his dad. He needed a father who was present, who showed up. So I stopped. I found this place 5 acres tucked away behind a wall of old maples and pines right on the edge of a development, but just far enough away to breathe. The house needed work, most do, but the land... There was a dock half rotted to splinters and a lake. My lake. The water shimmered in the morning still as glass, with nothing but the frogs and the birds to break the silence. I checked and double-checked the deed, walked the boundaries, with the county assessor paid extra to make sure it was all airtight. The lake was mine through and through. No public right-of-way, no access, no shared use. Just me and Daniel, a new start, the weight of everything before fading a little with every sunrise. We moved in late spring. The first months felt like a dream. I rebuilt the dock by hand, dug a fire pit near the shore, planted willows and reeds along the edge, trying to make a place for the wild things to come back. Daniel, quiet always in his head, more into books and bugs than any sport, took to the place instantly. He'd build little rafts, name every frog, collect stones and dragonflies for hours. I'd wake up early and walk the perimeter boots soft in the dewy grass, listening to the sound of my own breathing, healing for the first time in years. The neighbors seemed fine, mostly white-collar engineers and realtors and a retired dentist or two. Folks would wave, sometimes stop to chat while I worked in the yard. "You got the lake lot," Brad, he lived 3 doors down, said, leaning on my fence one Saturday. "Beautiful spot. Always wondered when someone would buy it. HOA used to manage it before the last owner let it go wild." I raised an eyebrow. "HOA managed the lake." Brad shrugged. "Used to mow around it, stock it with fish for the kids' derby. Last guy was a recluse, never left his house. The HOA just sort of filled in." He said it like it was nothing suburban lore. But here's the thing, I wasn't part of Meadowbrook Ridge HOA. My realtor was clear. I was in the buffer zone. My land wasn't under their jurisdiction, close, but not quite neighbors legally speaking. Still, something about the way Brad said it stuck with me. I tried to shake it off, just wanted to enjoy the quiet, let the world slow down. But a week later, I spotted 2 men in safety vests and clipboards poking around near the cattail marsh at the north edge of my property. When I asked what they were doing, they smiled, said they were the HOA maintenance team doing a routine drainage inspection. Drainage from what I asked. They exchanged looks. "Storm overflow, sir. Standard procedure. The lake's part of the neighborhood's flood mitigation zone." I kept my voice steady. "No, it's not. The lake is on private property. My property." Another smile. "Just following orders from the board." That's the first time I felt the hair on my neck stand up. It was the start of something, and deep down I knew it. A few days later, there's an envelope in my mailbox, not postmarked, just slipped in by hand. Inside, a friendly reminder from Meadowbrook Ridge, HOA, requesting I register my dock under their recreational structure guidelines and submit a $75 application fee. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but then the laughter stuck in my throat. This wasn't a nosy neighbor. This was a legal entity trying to get its claws in where it didn't belong. I wrote a firm response, attached my plat map, dropped it off at their clubhouse, and figured that'd be the end of it. It wasn't. Next day, another letter, more formal. Article 14, subsection C of the HOA Charter, stating all communal water features are subject to maintenance standards and visual harmony requirements. I wanted to ignore it truly, but then the water started changing. At first it was subtle, a greenish sheen near the north inlet. Then fish started dying, not all at once, but one by one. I found Daniel crying, holding a dead turtle. The water smelled wrong chemical, not like pond scum or swamp rot, but sharper, like cleaning fluid. I scooped up a mason jar full, took it to the county lab. Frank, an old Army buddy, worked there, owed me a favor. 3 days later he called. You've got phosphorus, high nitrates, fertilizer runoff, or maybe worse. But I didn't use fertilizer, never had. All I'd planted was native grass. That night, I walked the property in the dark, listening for anything. That's when I heard the hum, a faint mechanical noise, somewhere near the north bank. Couldn't shake it. Next morning before sunrise, I was out there again with a flashlight and my old Nikon. Fog curled off the lake thick enough to hide anything. That's when I found it, a narrow pipe, half buried in the mud, camouflaged in the brush. Water trickled out slow, steady. I dipped a stick in. Smelled metallic bitter. This was no rain runoff. I went back inside and dug up every county map, every utility plan I could find. That pipe wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't on any record. So I started cataloging photos, measurements, coordinates. I even set up a trail cam. Daniel asked what I was doing. I told him I was looking out for the frogs. Didn't want him to worry, not yet. But things got worse. The water changed colors, green here, red there. Birds vanished. The frogs went silent. One morning I found a family of ducks dead on the far bank. Death settled in quiet, unbothered. Daniel noticed. Why are the frogs gone? He asked, net in hand. And the water smells like a Band-Aid. I swallowed. Something might be wrong with the water, buddy. I'm looking into it. Can you fix it? His voice was so small. I'll try. And I meant it. But the next letter arrived, notice of non-compliant shoreline aesthetics and environmental standards, multi-page listing, every violation, overgrown reeds, dock coloration, unauthorized draining of a communal water feature. I wanted to scream not just at the gall, but at the language. Communal water feature. They were trying to rewrite the truth by sheer repetition. I called their number, voicemail, chipper voice, leave your concern below and we'll get back to you. They never did. So I showed up at the HOA meeting, wasn't technically a member, but that didn't seem to bother them when they handed out fines. The clubhouse looked like a ski lodge, all lemon-scented hallways and polished floors. About 20 people, most retirees, a few couples in polos, clipboards at the ready. The board sat behind a folding table, president, treasurer, landscaping chair, compliance officer. I waited my turn, then stood. My name is Michael Reed. I own the lake property on East Hollow Drive. Heads turned. I've received 3 notices from your board claiming jurisdiction over my property and the lake. The lake is privately owned. It is fully within my parcel, not a communal space, not a runoff zone, and not under your authority. President Diane Wells, perfectly coiffed, probably in her 60s, smile, never reaching her eyes, leaned in. Well, Mr. Reed, the previous owner allowed community access, fishing, paddle boats, events. There's precedent. No legal right-of-way, I said. And I have the deed to prove it. She didn't flinch. Surely we can find a cooperative path forward. The lake plays a vital ecological role in our neighborhood. It's part of the drainage strategy. Drainage strategy, I asked loud enough for the room. Because someone's pumping something into my lake. A ripple of murmurs. Diane blinked. We have no knowledge of any active drainage lines into the lake. I found a pipe hidden unmarked, still flowing. She straightened her papers. If you believe someone is acting unlawfully, you should file a complaint with the county. I will, I said and left. 3 days later, another notice, this time obstructing community maintenance, interfering with critical water flow infrastructure, attached a warm $200 fine. That's when I realized this wasn't about water. It was about power, seeing if I'd fold under pressure. Maybe they thought I was just another quiet veteran looking to be left alone. Maybe they figured I'd just pack up and leave. But I'd fought worse enemies, in worse places, enemies with guns, not clipboards. I wasn't going to let a suburban HOA poison my land and teach my son that bullies win. So I went quiet, didn't escalate, just started preparing. My nights got longer, but not from worry. I was building a case brick by brick. Every evening after Daniel was in bed, I'd dive into research stormwater, law property boundaries, EPA reporting. I started collecting samples every other day, mud water, dead leaves, little vials labeled and logged, all locked up in a freezer I bought just for that purpose. I mapped every suspicious pipe setup, more trail cameras, watched and waited. Turned out there wasn't just one inflow pipe. There were 3, each one cleverly hidden, each only active at night. Whoever planned this knew what they were doing, and they thought they could drown me in silence. But they had no idea who they were up against. I didn't have a law degree, but I'd spent years in the Army untangling logistics in war zones, fuel contracts, supply lines, environmental compliance, reading the fine print, finding loopholes, documenting every step. Pressure from the HOA ramped up. I started getting certified letters, official notices, stamped and signed threats couched in polite legalese. Pursuant to our ongoing review of community infrastructure assets and shared environmental features, your property and lake are now under consideration for inclusion in the HOA's environmental maintenance plan. Please submit all improvements for approval. Failure to comply may result in liens and assessments. Signed, Gwen Toiver, HOA Legal Affairs Committee. I read it 3 times, laughing sort of. It was a clever tactic. Redefine my lake as a shared environmental asset, demand compliance under that made-up authority, slowly blur the line between private and communal until nobody could tell the difference. I did what I always do when things get political. I got precise. I set up a meeting with Nora Hastings, the county land records supervisor. She was all sharp edges and dry wit, the kind of woman who could slice through red tape with a single look. I brought my plat map, spread it out on her desk, told her the whole story. She took her time studying every line and stamp. Your property includes the entire lake, no easements, no encumbrances. Full control, Mr. Reed. Can you write that down? I asked. She went further, printed me a certified embossed copy with the county seal. This, she said, is your shield. I made 5 copies, 1 for my safe, 1 for a neighbor I trusted, 1 for the sheriff's office just in case, and 2 for me. But the HOA didn't back off. Instead, they ramped up the crazy violation notices for excessive natural debris, i.e. fallen leaves, non-compliant dock lighting, a single solar lantern. Daniel and I had set up for fishing, and the fines just kept growing. $150, $400, or $900. I didn't pay a cent. Just kept mailing back copies of my certified parcel map and a note. Your authority does not extend to this property. I could see what they were doing, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Hoping I'd get tired or slip up, hoping I'd lash out and give them an excuse to paint me as uncooperative. I didn't bite. Instead, I dug deeper into legal precedent and learned about adverse possession, how if I let them get away with this long enough, they could eventually claim my land by default. That's what scared me most. They weren't just pushing paperwork, they were planting a flag inch by inch. So I went public, contacted the county newspaper, the Sentinel. Elena Powell, a reporter, showed up one Thursday afternoon. She was younger than I expected, but sharp. listened more than she talked. I showed her everything, the dead fish, the lab results, the photos, the pipes, the letters. She just took notes, snapped pictures, and asked, "Do you think this is intentional?" "I think it's controlled," I told her. "They want to use the lake but not take responsibility for the damage." The article hit 3 days later. HOA tensions bubble over private lake at center of toxic dumping dispute. It spread like wildfire. Suddenly, my neighbors weren't avoiding me. They were knocking on the door. Some angry, most just curious, a few genuinely concerned. More than one confessed they'd had no idea what the HOA was up to, using their name, their dues. Then came the letter, hand-delivered this time by Diane Wells herself. Standing at my gate, manila envelope in hand, dressed like she was about to film a bank commercial. "Mr. Reed, may I have a moment?" she called. I stayed on my porch. "I'd prefer if future communications came through your attorney," I said, cool as I could manage. "I'm hoping to avoid escalation," she replied, all fake smile. "We believe there's been a misunderstanding. Then stop sending violations for land you don't control." Her mouth tightened. "This is a community, Mr. Reed. Cooperation is essential. This is my property." I said, stepping closer. "And if you continue trespassing, manipulating documents, or threatening legal action, I'll have no choice but to escalate myself." She handed me the envelope and left. Inside, I found a new environmental integration plan, now referring to my lake as a shared resource zone, citing fabricated precedents and vague legal references with no citations, nonsense, but dangerous nonsense. If they submitted this to the county or state without challenge, it might stick. I needed a firewall, something bigger than the local HOA. That night I started drafting a formal complaint to the EPA. Not just about the dumping, but everything: the pipes, the chemical discharge, the environmental damage, the HOA's coordinated attempts to seize and regulate private land. But I didn't file it yet. I needed something undeniable, proof that would blow the story wide open. A few days later, the sky cracked open. First real rain of the season, a heavy pounding storm. Daniel and I sat on the porch watching water gush off the gutters. "Will the frogs come back after the rain?" he asked. I squeezed his shoulder. "Maybe, buddy, if the water gets clean again." But really, I was watching the lake. The water turned milky strange. And near the north shore, I saw it, air or liquid bubbling up from below. After Daniel went to bed, I pulled on my boots, grabbed my flashlight and shovel, and went out into the storm. Started digging by the disturbance. 6 inches down, my shovel hit metal, a narrow, rusted pipe, plastic sleeve buried in gravel, curving straight toward the HOA. Found a second, then a third, all feeding into the same bank. I flagged each spot, took photos, recorded video, then did something drastic. I cut the first pipe with bolt cutters. Grayish-green fluid gushed out, reeking of fertilizer and chemicals. Didn't sleep a wink that night. Cataloged everything, added it to a master folder. Operation Clearwater. Next morning, I dropped Daniel at school and drove to the county environmental health department. The place reeked of printer ink and old linoleum. Eventually, a weary-eyed man named Carter Given called me in. I laid it all out: maps, certified documents, photos, samples. "Any idea what this is?" he asked, staring at the sludge in the photos. "Lawn chemicals, maybe, or septic HVAC condensate. I'm no chemist, but I've got lab friends." Carter sighed. "HOAs are a gray area. Unless there's direct harm or an EPA complaint, I'm preparing one." He nodded. "Keep documenting. The more evidence, the harder for them to spin." That night I came home to an envelope duct taped to my gate, cease and desist, signed by the HOA Legal Committee. "You are hereby instructed to halt all disruptive and unauthorized excavation activities within the protected Greenbelt buffer zone bordering HOA jurisdiction. Further tampering will result in immediate legal action and potential criminal trespass charges." They were now calling my property their Greenbelt. Later, my trail cam caught something new: 3 men, dark jackets, flashlights, moving along the North Shore, tool bag in hand. They stopped where I'd cut the pipe, and tried to seal it up with duct tape, and a plastic coupling cleanup crew panicked fast. I saved the footage, sent it off-site. Called Frank, asked him to rush the samples. "I think you're about to find out this is bigger than lawn chemicals," he said. He was right. 2 days later, his results came in high nitrogen, phosphorus, zinc, and traces of petroleum-based solvents, concentrations high enough to trigger an EPA investigation. This wasn't runoff. This was active pollution, likely HVAC flushes, paint wash chemical agents, dumped right into my lake. I marked the spots with caution tape and staked up signs: environmental violation under investigation, federal reporting in progress, do not tamper. Took photos, sent them to the HOA. No message, just the images. That night, Diane Wells called her voicemail, started polite, turned frantic. "Michael, we need to speak immediately. There's been a misunderstanding and we believe I deleted it." There was no misunderstanding, just the sound of water draining and the reckoning that was coming. 3 days after I put up the caution tape, a man in a blazer and khakis showed up in a glossy black SUV. Didn't wait for a signature, just handed me a thick envelope and drove off. Inside notice of pending litigation. Meadowbrook Ridge HOA was suing me for unauthorized destruction of HOA-managed infrastructure, defamation, disruption of environmental systems, harassment of staff and board. They were flipping the script, painting me as the villain, the unstable vet causing trouble. They hired outside counsel, a big city law firm. Court date 2 weeks. I knew their game, legal fatigue, drowned me in paperwork until I quit. But they picked the wrong guy. I called John Slater, my old Army buddy now, an attorney in Denver. We hadn't spoken in years, but he took my call like no time had passed. "Remember that procurement report I wrote in Kandahar?" I asked. He laughed. "How could I forget? I sent him everything, the summons, the letters, the photos, the footage, the lab results. This isn't a real lawsuit," he said next day. "It's a bluff. Most of this isn't enforceable. And if they're dumping unpermitted waste, they've already broken multiple federal laws. I want to hit back. We will. But first, drain the lake." "Drain it?" I asked. "Don't destroy it. Lower it. Expose the pipes. Force visibility. Keep it legal. Call it maintenance." At first, it sounded wild. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Their power was in secrecy, in the dark, quiet finds letters crews at night. They couldn't handle sunlight. So I filed for aquatic maintenance with the county, a standard process. If you own a private lake, you can temporarily lower water for repairs or dredging as long as you don't affect adjacent properties or public waterways. My lake didn't. Approval came through, and I got to work. I rented a commercial-grade water pump from the landscaping supply in town, strapped it to my truck, rolled up to the lake, started setting up hoses. Posted signs everywhere. Notice: temporary maintenance, private property. Do not enter. The neighbors noticed some watch from across the fence, arms crossed, whispering. I didn't say a word, just flipped the switch. The pump kicked on, roaring in the early light, and water started gushing through the hoses, snaking down to a trench I dug for overflow. It was all legal, all controlled, and crucially very public. Within hours, the water receded. By the end of the day, the lake had dropped 3 feet. And then as the mud dried and the sun burned off the last of the morning fog, the truth rose up from the muck. 10 separate outflow pipes, all hidden below the normal water line. Some wrapped in camo mesh, others encased in concrete, all of them leading straight back toward the HOA development. A few had old construction tags, most didn't. Planned, built, hidden. That was the final puzzle piece. I attached every photo, video, lab result map, and timeline to my EPA complaint. Uploaded it through their portal, sent hard copies by certified mail. This was no longer a neighborly spat, it was a declaration of war. That night someone egged my truck. Not just a couple dozens. Splatters on the windshield, the hood, the doors, the mirrors. Daniel saw it next morning, his face crumpling. "Did we do something bad, Dad?" he whispered. "No, buddy," I said, cleaning sticky yolk off the side mirror. "We told the truth. Some people don't like that. I spent the next week scrubbing, pumping, documenting. By midweek, the lake was down another 2 feet. I marked every exposed pipe with caution tape, posted laminated printouts of the federal statutes being violated, and as if on cue, 2 black SUVs from the EPA showed up, badges, clipboards, utility belts, no smiles. They asked for me by name, walked the whole perimeter, checked every sample and document. I introduced them to Daniel, gave them water, let them take whatever they needed. At the north bank, where the pipes bunched together like a nest of snakes, one inspector crouched and whistled. "This isn't accidental," she said. She didn't elaborate, just took a sample and tagged it. "We'll be back." And they were. 2 days later, half the HOA board was served subpoenas investigations. One neighbor said a U.S. Marshal came to Diane Wells' house just after breakfast. Another board member tried to leave town, didn't make it. The lawsuit against me dropped overnight. Their lawyer gone. For the first time in months, I slept easy, didn't check the cameras, didn't jump at every noise, because now they were the ones watching the door waiting for the next shoe to drop. But this was never just about me. The HOA had always counted on shadows, unrecorded meetings, whispered threats, fines nobody could fight. They bullied people who didn't know how to push back. I did. I started with surveillance. Old habits die hard back in Afghanistan. I'd run sensor arrays, mapped out movements in hostile zones. Here I rigged up trail cams, Watcher 1 through Watcher 6, each one covering a different angle: north pipe, south shallows, dock, approach back gate. Video fed to a fireproof drive hidden in my attic. I even pointed one at my own front gate, caught the egging, caught the hooded men, even caught Diane herself, 2:17 a.m., standing in mud, shining a flashlight at the lake. She never touched anything, just stared, then slipped away. Meanwhile, I kept testing the water. Frank taught me how to do field samples. Sterile vials, dry ice, GPS labeled. Every 2 days, 5 points. The results kept piling up: phosphates, solvents, 2-ine-xylene. Enough to get the EPA's attention. Frank helped set up encrypted cloud backups, signed chain of custody docs, locked down everything. Daniel, sharp as ever, started asking tougher questions. "Why do people at school look at us funny?" he asked one night. I tried to smile. Some people don't like it when others stand up for themselves. But we're doing the right thing. He nodded, but I saw the worry in his eyes. So I took a risk. Made a website, clearwaterfacts.com. Posted every fact, maps, diagrams, photos, video clips, printed flyers, posted them on community boards: private lake public violation. Visit clearwaterfacts.com. Within 48 hours, the site was flooded. Neighbors emailed support, anonymous tips trickled in. One woman said her husband had helped install storm lines under HOA pressure, temporary, they'd promised. A retired city worker handed me old subdivision blueprints, 2 drainage lines marked as provisional, never approved, never permitted. The pressure cooker blew. Meadowbrook Ridge board members stopped waving, stopped walking their dogs. HOA trucks would idle across from my driveway, engine running, until I came outside with my phone. They'd peel off quick, but the cameras never blinked. The lake kept dropping, and every day more secrets came up. On the 6th day, I found a pipe stamped with 2007 Liberty Engineering. Inside, thick black sludge rainbow sheen. Not just a dispute over land, it was a cover-up. It took 8 days to get the water down far enough. The lake bed looked like a battlefield, mud-broken PVC, beer cans sun-bleached in the muck. The lake had once been my sanctuary, now it was my proof. Cars slowed on the gravel road. People stared, some with awe, some with anger. That silence from the HOA, louder than any threat. One morning, hammering in another caution sign, I spotted a guy in khakis, tablet in hand, trying to sneak photos. That afternoon, I got a cease and desist from a new law firm claiming my environmental excavation had caused $280,000 in aesthetic and economic damages to the community. I forwarded the email to John, my attorney, with 2 words: "Let's dance." He called 5 minutes later, laughing. "They're panicking. That number's fake. I'll respond, but this isn't a lawsuit, it's a confession. What do you mean? I asked. They just admitted your lake is central to the community. They relied on it. And now your lawful actions threaten to expose what they're desperate to keep buried. The city water department reached out, not a complaint, but a thank you. My documentation helped them identify cross-contaminated storm lines leaching into the aquifer for years. They offered funding for cleanup if I'd cooperate with their investigators. I agreed on one condition: full transparency, public reporting. The city signed off. EPA came back with hazmat suits and portable drilling rigs, took hours, sampling, sediment bagging, contaminated soil, tagging pipes. By the time they left, 3 discharge points were marked for arch criminal review. That night I found Daniel on the dock staring at the cracked mud. "It looks ugly," he said. "It does." I told him, but sometimes things have to get ugly before they can heal. "Will the frogs come back?" he whispered. "Yes," I said, "and when they do, they'll have clean water." That night I got an anonymous message through the website. Check the HOA newsletter from 2011. I dug through the online archives there. It was a puff piece about a green drainage initiative, buried inside a paragraph about temporary experimental piping, redirecting overflow to adjacent non-buildable land parcels. My parcel, my lake, no permits, no vote. Diane Wells was the president then. Not just complicit, she designed the scam. I posted the proof online. In 24 hours it went viral. Parents, seniors, neighbors realized they'd been lied to for years. The backlash came hard. Emergency board meeting recall petitions, people organizing to kick the whole board out. Someone snapped a photo of a moving truck outside Diane's house. She was leaving. I'd drained the lake, but Diane was the one drowning. The morning I filed the formal EPA complaint, it didn't feel like victory or revenge, just relief. I woke up before sunrise, brewed my coffee in the quiet. Daniel was still asleep. The house was still wind, barely rustling the trees. I'd pictured this moment for months. Imagined courtrooms, headlines, angry neighbors. None of that mattered now. At exactly 7:30 a.m., I logged onto the EPA portal and uploaded everything. Photos, videos, scans, blueprints, audio files, sworn statements. Over 200 files. The confirmation email hit my inbox 3 minutes later. It was done. The truth was finally out there. But I didn't just wait. Within days, an EPA compliance officer, Bethany Ruiz, called me. Her voice was calm but direct. "Mr. Reed, your submission is the most complete civilian complaint I've seen in years. Have you worked in regulatory before war zones?" I replied. This wasn't so different. She laughed, then turned serious. "I need your permission to refer this case to our Criminal Investigations Division." "You have it," I said. Once that domino fell, the rest came tumbling down. Federal agents came to Meadowbrook Ridge, not with cameras and clipboards, but with badges and subpoenas. Drones flew over retention ponds, over rooftops. Somebody on the board, maybe the treasurer, leaked an internal email warning everyone to lawyer up. Then came the subpoenas. Every board minute, every contractor record, every invoice and permit going back 15 years. You could feel the panic in the air, see it behind the curtains of every immaculate house. One neighbor, a retired guy who'd once scolded me for embarrassing the community, walked up to me in the driveway. I never knew he muttered eyes down. "We thought it was just runoff. No one told us." I nodded. "If they'd told you, they'd have been liable." He shuffled away, guilt heavy on his shoulders. That was the thing now everyone knew, and no one could pretend otherwise. The website blew up. Local journalists wanted interviews. I let one news crew film the EPA teams hauling out bags of sludge and tagging pipes. That footage made the evening news. HOA under federal investigation after private lake contamination scandal. It was surreal watching the story play out on TV, my muddy boots on the screen, but what mattered most was how things started to shift. The threats from the HOA stopped. Instead, I got emails, requests for meetings, requests for community dialogue. The new interim board president, Kelly, wanted a roundtable. I ignored it. I knew while they held meetings, the feds were building cases. Bethany Ruiz called again. We found something in the sediment analysis, paint thinners, fuel additives, solvents, going back over a decade. Somebody used your lake like a dump. Can you prove who? We're working on it. The contractors are all LLCs dissolved years ago, but there's a pattern. We'll press charges if we can link signatures. She paused. You started something bigger than you know. Her words sat with me. I never meant to be a crusader. I just wanted my boy to have a safe place to grow up for the frogs to come back. But the damage wasn't just mine. It belonged to every neighbor who let their kids swim here. Every dog that drank the water, every person who trusted the silence. And the board? They knew, maybe not every detail, but enough to keep lying, keep threatening, keep spinning. But I didn't go away. I drained the lake. I filed the complaint. Now the truth was in hands that could actually do something. And then it wasn't just the EPA anymore. The story spread, other neighborhoods reached out. Their HOAs had pulled the same stunts. Secret pipes forced contracts, fines for sustainability projects that never existed. Clearwaterfacts.com became a clearinghouse. People shared their own stories, their own evidence. Attorneys volunteered, neighbors helped translate records. All from one drained lake, one stubborn man who refused to stay quiet. The next week I walked the lake bed, dry cracked flags and EPA tags everywhere. Stopped at the center, knelt down, hand on the earth. You'll breathe again, I whispered. I promise. Stood up, looked to the horizon, waiting for justice to ripple outward. And then justice came. First arrest happened at dawn. I heard from Frank, my lab buddy. They got her, he said, voice shaking. Diane Wells, 4 felonies, no bail, unlawful discharge of pollutants, tampering with monitoring equipment, obstruction, conspiracy. It didn't feel real at first, like I'd carried the weight for so long I couldn't believe it was finally shifting. But then the headlines hit: local, regional, national HOA board president arrested in federal environmental crime probe. There was Diane's face smiling beside a community beautification sign. Ironic, right? The EPA released a statement. Meadowbrook Ridge, HOA, had installed an illegal drainage network, funneled toxic runoff into my private lake for over a decade, funded through discretionary dues never disclosed. They'd falsified maintenance logs and contractor records. It wasn't just Diane, 2 more board members indicted. Thomas Keller, the treasurer, Cynthia Drake, the environmental compliance officer, except her resume was fake, and Thomas had signed off on hundreds of thousands in sustainability services that turned out to be kickbacks. Fraud, pollution, obstruction, all of it exposed. The neighborhood message board exploded. People wanted answers, wanted refunds, wanted change. Some thanked me. Mr. Reed, the folk hero. I didn't feel like a hero, just tired, relieved. Then came the recall vote. Under federal investigation and public fury, the board dissolved itself. Someone slipped the transcript under my door along with a petition. Would I serve on the new board? I laughed. Me, the man who told the HOA where to shove their dock permit. But Daniel changed my mind. You could make sure it doesn't happen again, he said one night, sitting with me on the dried lake bed, moonlight bright on cracked clay. So I agreed on one condition: the new charter would be rewritten with public oversight and environmental transparency. No one would ever claim my lake again. They agreed. What happened next was something I'd never believed possible. Neighbors showed up with gloves and trash bags, helped clear debris. Kids painted safety signs. Retired engineers reviewed the pipes. The local biology teacher led a wetlands restoration project. Daniel started drawing frogs again. The EPA closure report came, and Bethany Ruiz in person handed me a framed copy. You didn't just drain a lake, she said. You exposed a system that thought it was untouchable. I shook her hand. It was never about the water. It was about the silence. And the silence, well, it was gone now. The silence was gone, replaced by the sound of hammers rebuilding the dock, shovels planting new reeds, laughter echoing as neighbors, some who'd never spoken before, worked side by side. We'd drained the poison, but now it was about the healing. The first frog came back in early April. Daniel was the one who spotted it squatting by the edge of a puddle where the new reeds grew, eyes wide as he pointed. Dad, look! I crouched beside him, the soft mud squishing under my boots, heart pounding in a way that felt new again. The frog sat still, sunbathing, throat ballooning out in a croak that sounded like the past and the future all at once. He came back, Daniel whispered, and I nodded too, choked up to say much. That moment, the three of us, me, my son, that little frog, felt like a small miracle. We hadn't filled the lake completely yet. EPA teams were still checking sediment, city workers were installing new filters, making sure nothing was left to poison the future. But nature didn't wait for perfect. Soon the dragonflies came back, hummingbird bright, flashing over shallow pools. Red-winged blackbirds made nests in the reeds. Even the turtles returned, sunning themselves on the rocks we'd hauled to the banks. We refilled the lake, slow and steady, careful as a surgeon, rainwater clean runoff pumps feeding from safe wells. I documented every step. Daniel started a blog, Lake Lessons, half science journal, half storybook. His first entry read, "Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, but sometimes they fix them too." My dad fixed a lake. I read that in the garage so he wouldn't see me cry. The new board wasn't really a board anymore. We called it the Meadowbrook Watershed. Cooperative, no fines, no threats, just a committee of volunteers. No one served more than 6 months, everything open and transparent. I served the first term not because I wanted to, but because people needed to see that leadership could be quiet, honest, rooted in service, not control. We held open forums, brought in environmental experts, let the city help us plant native vegetation. Even the press came by not for scandal, but to learn. You know, I used to think things like this only happen in stories. But all it takes is one unchecked authority, one overlooked pipe, one community too tired to ask questions, or just one stubborn person refusing to stay quiet. Standing on the new dock, the smell of cedar and water and sunlight all around, I looked out across the full lake and saw reflections, not just trees or clouds, but everything that had changed. The neighborhood still argued about mailboxes and parking, but those things didn't seem to matter as much. Now we had a shared memory, one that ran deep as the water. Daniel stood beside me, taller, now voice a little deeper, scanning the surface for ripples. "I think they'll come back in big numbers this year," he said. "The frogs, I mean." I grinned. "I think so too." He turned half serious, half joking. "You ever think about selling, moving away?" I blinked. "No." "Why?" He shrugged. "Just, most people would have left after all this." I smiled, put my arm around his shoulders. "Most people didn't build this place from the bones up. This is ours, Daniel. Every inch was fought for." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small glass vial, murky sludge, sealed inside the last sample I took before we removed the final pipe. "Keep this," I told him, "so you remember bad things can hide in beautiful places and we don't ever stay quiet again." He turned the vial in his hand, wrinkling his nose. "Looks gross." I laughed. "It is. But it's proof." Behind us, 3 kids splashed in the shallows, watched by a mom in a camp chair who waved when we looked her way. I waved back. The simplest things felt earned now. The EPA closed the investigation for good 2 months later. Charges stuck for all 3 board members. 2 pled guilty. Diane Wells was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and hit with a 7-figure fine. She tried to settle, but the court made it clear this wasn't a mistake, it was a choice, and choices have consequences. I never saw her again. Didn't need to. The lake healed slow, just like us. The frogs multiplied, the reeds grew tall, the fish returned, and every now and then, when the wind's calm and the sun's just right, the surface turns to glass, and I remember how far we've come. Not just from corruption or pollution, but from fear. We didn't just drain a lake, we drained a lie. And in its place, we built something no HOA fine could touch, a legacy of truth. You know, folks stop by sometimes and ask how I did it. The answer's simple, really. I just refuse to let go of the facts of the fight, of the hope that someday the silence would give way to something better. I wanted Daniel to see that, to know that you don't give in to bullies no matter what uniform they wear. The world doesn't change all at once, but it changes, one voice, one lake, one stubborn dad at a time. And when the frogs sing at dusk, and my boy leans back on the dock with a smile on his face, that's all the peace I ever needed. And it's a peace I'll keep no matter what comes next.